I'll let my co-host introduce himself as well. We both run Papagayo, and so Papagayo is a student literacy group out of EPCC, based both at the Valle Verde campus and Rio Grande. And Rio Grande is where I teach, and Rio Grande also is a place, a special campus, because it's right by the border with Juarez, which is where I'm from. And so I can identify a lot with the work of Jose. So Jose Olivarez is a son of Mexican immigrants. He is a winner of fellowships from Poets House, the Bronx Council of the Arts, the Poetry Foundation, the Conversation Literary Festival. You can find his work in the Breakbeat Poets collection, particularly the volume 4, which is Latin Next. That's a pun. And he is also the author of the book that I'm holding here, Citizen Illegal, which came out a couple of years ago, and which you can find at your local bookstores. You know, try to support local bookstores and minor bookstores owned by people of color. Citizen Illegal, it was shortlisted for the 2019 Penn Gene Stein Book Award. I know many of you here have read it, and so this is the time to have a conversation with Jose about his work, and also just about poetry and the literature. So I want to welcome you all here again from EPCC. I want to thank the Paso's program for making this possible, as well as the Spring Arts Festival. I'll let my co-host introduce himself, and then we can get started with today's special guest.
All right, right on. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm using a slightly different setup than I had been using, so it's been a little rusty. I just got to make sure first. Yes, I'm Richie Marufo. I teach as well at the college and all over the city for a variety of community literary events, including the Barbed Wire Open Mic. I just want to say hi to everyone, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Everyone who's being part of this EPCC Spring Arts Festival, and again, completely grateful that we're able to do this with Jose. And I'm going to keep I'm not going to go on. I just want to keep this short because I definitely want to bring Jose up and have him perform, and you guys have a chance to talk to him. So thanks again, everyone, for being here.
All right. So thank you, Richie. Thank you, Jorge, so much for having me. My name is Jose Guadalupe Olivares. I'm so excited to be here to read for you. I'm going to read some poems from my book, and then I'm going to read some new poems as well, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to start from the book. So this poem is called Mexican American Disambiguation, after Idris Goodwin, and it is on page 41 if you're following along. Mexican American Disambiguation. My parents are Mexican, who are not to be confused with Mexican Americans or Chicanos. I am a Chicano from Chicago, which means I'm a Mexican American with a fancy college degree and a few tattoos. My parents are Mexican, who are not to be confused with Mexicans still living in Mexico. Those Mexicans call themselves Mexicanos. White folks at parties call them pobrecitos. American colleges call them international students and diverse. My mom was white in Mexico and my dad was mestizo. And after they crossed the border, they became diverse and minorities and ethnic and exotic. But my parents call themselves Mexicanos, who again should not be confused for Mexicanos living in Mexico. Those Mexicanos might call my family gringos, which is the word my family calls white folks, and white folks call my parents interracial. Colleges say, put them on a brochure. My parents say, ¿Qué significa esa palabra? I point out that all the men in my family marry lighter-skinned women. That's the Chicano in me, which means it's the fancy college degrees in me, which is also diverse of me. Everything in me is diverse, even when I eat American foods like hamburgers, which, to clarify, are American when a white person eats them and diverse when my family eats them. So much of America can be understood like this. My parents were undocumented when they came to this country. And by undocumented, I mean sin papeles. And by sin papeles, I mean royally fucked, which should not be confused with the American dream, though the two are cousins. Colleges are not looking for undocumented diversity. My dad became a citizen, which should not be confused with keys to the house. We were safe from deportation, which should not be confused with walking the plank, though they're cousins. I call that sociology, but that's just the Chicano in me, who should not be confused with the diversity in me, or the Mexicano in me, who is constantly fighting with the upwardly mobile in me, who is good friends with the Mexican American in me, who the colleges love, but only on brochures, who the government calls non-white Hispanic or white Hispanic, who my parents call mijo, even when I don't come home so much. Cool. So that's that poem. Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us, I'm going to be reading some poems. So hopefully you're okay with that. I'm just going to jump into the next one because reading poems in a Zoom setting is a little bit awkward. And it's not, it's hard to transition sometimes. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. This next poem is called I Love the World, So I Married It. It's on page 59. This is a poem that I wrote because growing up, people would make fun of each other. They would say, if you love it so much, why don't you marry it? And that phrase got stuck in my head. And so I was like, maybe I can use that in a poem. I love the world, so I married it. Music, even on the day my grandma died, there were mangoes, though I tasted nothing. But slowly I came back to the world and carne asada, better than I remembered, smoke off the meat. I couldn't contain my happiness, even though it felt offensive to smile with my grandma buried and getting eaten by the flowers. And sometimes I look at my love and think I would like to stay, to put a welcome mat on our doorstep with our names hyphenated. When I was young, I believed in forever. Then my uncle died, and I knew forever included none of my family, included no friends, their stories rotting in my head until I lose them again. So I know I will divorce the world and let it keep my most treasured possessions. A 6-piece with lemon pepper and mild sauce on, all the honey of a slow kiss, my Apple Music playlist, the way mi abuelita smiled and called me Lupito. I hated that name, except when she said it. Cool. Yeah, so thank you for being here. Yesterday Richie read a poem that mentioned, what was it, Richie? Nachos from the tap?
Yes, sir. Not just from the tap.
Nachos from the tap. Yeah. So in Chicago, we got this thing called mild sauce. And so if you're ever in Chicago, find a chicken spot and get a 6-piece with lemon pepper and mild sauce. And then you can tweet at me or do whatever and tell me that you tried it. Let me know what you think. I'm going to read this poem. This poem is called No Vaporu. It's on page 52. I wrote this poem because I was really nerdy growing up. And so I read all the time. And in all the books that I read, nobody ever used Vaporu. And it always just struck me as weird. I was like, how come I know people must be getting sick. How come no one is using Vaporu? So I always said if I ever wrote a book, Vaporu was going to be in the book. So this is my poem for Vaporu. Vaporu is pronounced Vaporu, like loud or chew. The label for Vaporu says it's for cough suppression, but in my house, Vaporu is for headaches, sore muscles, nightmares, and everything else. Put some Vaporu on my dad's diabetic toes and watch the sugar evaporate. Miss a day of church? Put some Vaporu on your forehead and watch forgiveness flush your cheeks. Put some Vaporu on our bank account and watch the bill collector stop calling. When I forget a word in Spanish, I take a teaspoon of Vaporu under the tongue. Cool. So that's that poem. Shout out to Vic's Vaporu. You know what I'm saying?
Sponsored by Vaporu.
Yeah, right. I wish. When when I went to college, I got sick, and my roommate, who was a white dude, he was like, "Oh, you want some vapor rub, bro? You want some vapor rub? It'll help you." And I was like, "What the fuck? What is vapor rub?" I had never heard it called that in my life. And then he showed me it, and I was like, "Oh, Vaporu. Why didn't you just say Vaporu?
Right.
Why are you calling it the wrong name?" All right, this is a new poem. This poem is called Tradition. The stories say Mexicans grew out of the dirt, same as the corn stalks. Of course, we weren't Mexicans back then. Whatever we were was lost. No, not lost. It was submerged under empire, died by blood and gunpowder. Believe what you want. Maybe we grew out of the dirt. Maybe agave is our sibling. Maybe mountains our mother. The oldest tradition I know is watching my dad bet money on Mexican boxers, no matter the odds. I don't know about y'all, but I'm the child of loss and the inheritor of losing. I'm not complaining though. I know the tradition. I bet everything I have on my people and dare the universe to beat us.
Mm,
Cool. That's that poem.
love
See.
that.
What do I want to read next? All right, here's another poem. This poem is called Now I'm Baloney. My parents were born from a car. They climbed out and kissed the car on its cheek. My grandmother, to be a first generation person. 23andMe reports I'm a descendant of pistons and drivetrains. 33% irrigation tools. You are what you do. My first job was in a lunch meat factory. Now I'm baloney. It's not so bad being a person. The front seat of a car is more comfortable than the trunk. When they were babies, my parents dreamt of being Lamborghinis, not people. You are what your children grow up to do. If I put my parents' names on papers, what happens? The answer is no comment. The answer is quien sabe. The answer is yo no sé, pero no es abogado. People are overrated. Give me avocados. All right, let's see. I'll read you the poem that I wrote today. This poem is called Miracle. And so just so everybody knows, I'm gonna read for a little while and then afterwards we can have a conversation. So if you have questions, you can already put them in the chat so you don't forget them or whatever, but I'm looking forward just to talking about whatever you want to talk about. This poem is called Miracle. Miracle, miracle, I say it when my lover wakes up. When she touches my hand, it's a miracle. My homies text, it's a miracle. They call, they don't. Miracle, miracle, the wind scratches their scalp. Moonlight flirts with them. Miracle, I know somebody already rolled their eyes. I know there's too many miracles in this poem. 500,000 dead from coronavirus agree with you. I know we live against miracles. We burn the dead. We try to contain our grief like children trying to keep a butterfly in a sealed jar. Miracle, we are alive. Miracle, our dead still visit. Miracle, mi tío Rodrigo adds his whiskered heart to Chente's gritos. Miracle, I remember the first miracle I learned was Jesus turning water to wine. Miracle, we agree. So miracles, all the grapes turn to wine. Miracles, all the hands that pick the grapes. Miracles, every touch. Miracle, we are here too briefly to ignore the miracle of touch. How when my lover touches me, my body turns into something like wine. Cool. So that's the new poem. Yeah, and it's after there's a song, it has Chance the Rapper on it, who's also a Chicagoan. There's a song called Miracle by The Social Experiment that kind of inspired that one. All right, so this is another new poem. This one is a lot angrier. I wrote this, I don't know if you've been following the news or not, but in Chicago, there was a young boy, a 13-year-old named Adam Toledo, that was killed by the police. And right after that, like right after they released the video, an editor asked me to write a poem. And so I deleted that because what was I gonna say? You know what I'm saying? What was I gonna say? The only thing really that I wanted to say was like, you know, screw Lori Lightfoot, who's the mayor of Chicago, and you know, abolish the police. So, but I ended up writing a poem that not about or after, but I was in my feelings of anger at the situation, and so this is kind of in that mode. This is called Mexican Heaven, which, you know, if you've read the book, you know that I have a bunch of poems already called Mexican Heaven. I kind of think I'm just gonna write poems called Mexican Heaven in all my books from now until forever, just because I think that's dope. So this is Mexican Heaven, a new Mexican heaven. Forget heaven and its promises of gold. Everything we make on this planet has one purpose. Every poem, every act of photosynthesis, every protest. If heaven is real, then its gates are closed to us. Maybe heaven is just a museum of all the life we have extinguished, extincted. We are death machines building death machines. In life, we are useless to stop the deaths. In death, we arrive at God's house, only to find God torturing dolls in the yard. We wanted to be made in God's image. We imagine gold and not the breaking that gold requires. So that's the poem that I wrote, trying to sit in my anger. And here's another poem removed from that, but I've been thinking a lot about how beauty and wealth we want to erase all ugliness, but I think perfection is boring. And so I would rather, like, I know I'm kind of ugly, you know what I'm saying? I like prefer my ugliness in some, you know, not that I'm really ugly, like you see me, you know I'm guapo, you know what I'm saying? But I'm not Brad Pitt is what I'm saying, you feel me? But forget Brad Pitt. So this poem is called Ugly. Ugly. I'm just laughing at myself. I'm like, yo, I can't believe I get to do this. All right, ugly. I'm done with beauty. The rich can have it. Done trying to imitate their laser printed faces. What do I know of beauty? But my brother's lip only smiles. He started smiling with his whole mouth once he got his teeth fixed. The joke's on him. He's still ugly. Let the rich own beauty. The truth is, every singer reaches down for a little extra sweetness when they're ready to break your heart. My brother laughs too loud and jokes too much and has never been ugly a day in his life. I know that because we have the same face. So that's my poem. Let's see. What else do I want to read? I'll read this poem. This poem is called Poem Where No One Is Deported. I wrote it because a trend that I noticed, which maybe you have noticed too, is that in popular media, in popular imaginations, whenever there's a show that features Latinx people or Mexicans, like someone has to have an encounter with like ICE or Border Patrol. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, you know, people at ABC and Netflix, they just sprinkle like a deportation in, like it's just sugar or something, you know what I mean? Like it's nothing. And so I was like, I this is kind of like to push back on that. So this is called Poem Where No One Is Deported. Now I like to imagine La Migra running into the sock factory where my mom and her friends worked. It was all women who worked there, women who braided each other's hair during breaks, women who wore rosaries and never had a hair out of place, women who were ready for cameras or for God, who ended all their sentences with, si Dios quiere, as in the day before the immigration raid, when the rumor of a raid was passed around like bread, and the women made plans, si Dios quiere. So when the immigration officers arrived, they found boxes of socks and all the women absent, safe at home. Those officers thought no one was working. They were wrong. The women would say it was God working, and it was God. But the God my mom taught us to fear was vengeful. He might have wet his thumb and wiped La Migra out of this world like a smudge on a mirror. This God was the God that woke me up at 7 a.m. every morning to let me know there was food in the fridge for me and my brothers. I never asked my mom where the food came from, but she told me anyway. Gracias a Dios. Gracias a Dios de la comida. Gracias a Dios de las mujeres. Gracias a Dios del chisme, who heard all La Migra's plans and whispered them into the right ears to keep our family safe. Cool. Here's another sad poem. You know what I mean? Throw your hands in the air if you're ready to get real sad. This poem is called Perder. I wrote it because I was listening to Vicente Fernandez's song Volver, Volver, and he has that line. He says it twice. He says, Yo sé perder, yo sé perder. And the way that he sings it, it just, it hurt me a little bit. You know what I mean? Like I could feel it. I was like, I really believe Chente. So I wrote this poem. This poem is called Perder. Well, I have a question for you, but I'll ask it later. Perder. Sidewalks lined with branches, flashing scarlet buds, and I want to know if it's true. My grandma in the ground for a couple of years. Is it long enough? Is it her lipstick blushing the blooms of the trees that bow their heads to greet me? Or am I trying to forget the only lesson we are required to learn? The first loss is not the last loss. And once the losing begins, it won't end until it has taken everything. So that's the poem Perder. My question was, you know, I've never been to El Paso. I was wondering, what is spring like in El Paso? Like, do you have like the what are they called? The cherry blossoms and the trees. Like, is the spring pop off like that? Dusty. Shout out to Jennifer.
Mhm.
Jennifer said it's dusty. What is spring like?
Yeah, so many replies there. Yeah, definitely dusty. You know, it's like allergy season for us here. You know, it starts getting really warm. You know, we get like the 90s soon enough. It's a, you know, I know in Hollywood, you know, whenever they have El Paso in some scene, you know, like you were saying about migrants, it's like they think of it as a desert, right? But there's a lot of biodiversity, and we have wetlands here, believe it or not, Rio Bosque, and it's a beautiful city. You know, I know I keep saying this, Jose, but you really got to come down and see it for yourself, and because we have such sites to show you.
I'm down. I'm hella down to visit. I was just wondering because here, you know, what happens is the trees which have been barren all winter suddenly, you know, they come alive with color. And so that's kind of what inspired that poem, was noticing how bright the trees were around me. So I was wondering if you saw something similar down in El Chuco.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would love to visit. All right, that was my question. All right, this next poem is called Regret. Regret. My dad never said regret, but it hung from his lip like a cigarette. I remember that night in Mexico, my dad home with a little bit of money. In another life, he could have flirted with the whole bar. In this one, he was home by midnight. My infant brother sick on vacation. To be a dad is to be bossed at work and bossed at home. It's easy to daydream about love when it is a chorus of kisses. What about when love is a dirty diaper and a snot nose you have to wipe? My dad rarely said love, but he always left the bar. That's that poem. So a lot of these poems are shorter poems, and I wrote them because one of my friends posted a poem by Rupi Kaur, who you may or may not be familiar with, but she sells like millions of books. She's
Mhm.
a poet. So I was like, I'm gonna try and write some Rupi Kaur type poems. And so these are
Mhm.
some of my Rupi Kaur type poems, which are not at all like her poems, but it's my own way to do them. All right, here's another poem, Economics. I'll read three more poems, Economics. Remembering from my desk, I want to lighten my dad's shadow, make him neat the way my sociology textbooks describe the working class, overworked, anxious, and tired. Language like vision gets blurry at a distance. Let me bring you closer. When we heard my dad rip open bills, we know to stay in our room. If my dad was angry at his bosses, we didn't know. There were no bosses in our house, only us listening to envelopes being ripped and waiting. Cool. Also, the other thing about these poems is a lot of them take their uh, inspiration from growing up broke. Uh, so that's how it goes. You know what I mean? I'll read this poem too, just because it's really short. This is a 3-line poem. This poem is called Authenticity. Here goes an authentic Chicano love poem. One of my college crushes used to eat hot Cheetos so smooth she never got red dust on her fingers. That's the whole poem. I'm trying to find 2 more poems in particular, and I can't find them. Uh, they're in here somewhere. I have like 50 pages at this point, which makes it a little bit harder than I thought. All right, here, I found it. So I'm gonna read 2 more poems. I hope someone looks at me eat hot Cheetos like that. She was really smooth. I have no smoothness whatsoever. So whenever I eat hot Cheetos, like my whole hand is red. You know what I mean? Like you could never tell she had been eating them, and she was always eating them. All right. No, she didn't use chopsticks. She was, she had long fingernails, so maybe that was the trick. You know what I'm saying? This poem is called Mercedes Says Hyacinth Look Like Little Fireworks Shows. Hyacinth is a flower. Where I grew up, we drew flowers as circles with repeating oval petals. What did we know of pistols but the pop of toy guns? We knew the names of all the fireworks, Roman candles, sparklers, rockets, and fountains. We leapt away from lit fireworks. We pointed at the sky as our hands made hyacinth, made lilies out of the night. Nevertheless, I'll never forget the day an old love brushed a flower gently over my face before kissing me. More than water, more than air, I needed to know the name of that flower. All right, so that's that poem. And then the last poem that I'll read is another Mercedes poem. Mercedes is one of my friends. She's like an incredible photographer, and she's also like very random, which makes her a great person for poets because she just texts me. You know, most people are predictable in some way. You know what I mean? They text you like, "How are you? Como es?" You know what I mean? "Que vole," whatever. Mercedes just pops up with random questions. And so this is another poem that she inspired. She texted me this. This poem is called Mercedes Says She Prefers the Word Discoteca to the Word Club. Give me words that sing. Ojalá is 3 chickens laying brown eggs. Hope has its own music, but it's missing an accordion. My friends are up to their usual shenanigans, drinking good wine and being sad. My friends don't get into trouble. Trouble wears sombreros and calls it a costume. My friends are traviesos y malcriados y sinvergüenzas. Let me translate. DJ Cash Era is making the walls sweat. Slow jams crawl through the speakers and our hips move like someone spilled syrup over the night. Mercedes is right. I'm always down to go to the discoteca, a word that spins on the tongue like a disco ball. Keep your clubs. Cops carry clubs, and in this poem, there are no police. Someone spilled syrup over the night. It was us. The moon is a chicken singing, ojalá, ojalá, ojalá. Cool. So I'll stop right there for now. And thank you all so much for listening. I'm excited to jump into conversation with all of you.
Let's give Jose a round, please. And or you can just, you know, you got the little clap icon there. That was amazing, Jose. Thank you for sharing, you know, some of your new work with us too. You can follow in the chat. You know, you have a lot of comments there. But yeah, you know, let's get this conversation going. You know, we have students who read your work, some who are just being exposed to it for the first time. So if whoever wanted to jump in, you're welcome to. If you want to just unmute, or if you can also drop it in the chat, and I can read it for you.
I see Lucero asked the question, can we get any of your poems online? If you go to my website, joseolivarez.com, there's a whole bunch of poems that have been published that you can find online. And then, you know, in all honesty, if you search the name of my book and then like the word PDF, like you could probably find a bootleg copy of my book on the internet. So, you know, if you don't have it, you can find it for sure.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Lucero. Yeah, there's the link.
Thank you, Richie.
So Stacy's got a question.
Where did my mom's 50th birthday come from? So that poem, Stacy, you know, like the poem is titled, I wrote it on my mom's 50th birthday. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, right? But I was very, you know, whenever I start to write about my mom, I try to like pay special attention because, you know, all of us are conditioned in different ways, right? And so I want to make sure that I write about my mom, not just as a caretaker, not just in her relation to me. So that poem was about thinking, you know, my mom had me pretty young. So thinking about like, if you know, especially on my mom's 50th birthday, I was trying to think like, if I could give my mom anything, right? Anything, what would I give her? And the answer was immediately like one more day where she didn't have to be a mom, right? Where she could just hang out with her sisters back in Mexico, where she's from Jalisco, and like go to the clubs and flirt with guys and not have to worry about the consequences. So that's where that poem came from. It's like, you know, in that poem, I'm like almost casting a spell, right? And so I'm taking over for her so that she can go do whatever she wants to do. So that's where that poem comes from.
And then Yasmin has her hand raised. Go ahead, Yasmin.
Oh, I'm sorry, I cut my head off. Hey, Jose. So I just have a quick question. I think a little bit more like from a writer point of view. So when you were writing the drafts for your collection, did you have any idea that they were going to connect with so many readers? Like, were you thinking about your audience, or you were just writing like for yourself?
That's a great question. I was writing for myself in some ways, but it was like for a very particular self. I was thinking about when I felt my loneliest, right? And so for me, the answer of like when I was my loneliest, it was like when I was barely a teenager and I was like attempting to figure out all of these things. And so I thought about how, you know, some of the books that I was reading helped me find community, but a lot of the books actually made me feel more lonely, right? Because they made me realize how kind of not disconnected, you know what I mean? Like I had my family and I had my friends, but you know how, I mean, especially growing up in Chicago, like, you know, we couldn't go to Mexico every weekend. You know what I mean? Like we were lucky if we could go once a year. And so I wanted to have a book that could, you know, that I wish somebody had given me when I was that age, to help me feel a little less lonely, right? So I was writing for myself in that way. But I had no idea that it was going to go beyond that. You know, I thought my parents were gonna buy a book, you know, very like embarrassed, but they were gonna buy a book. My brothers were gonna buy books, and then I thought basically that was it. Um, and it kind of, you know, it's, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea exactly why it's caught on. I try to write it also for my brothers. Um, that they're always like the people that I use to test my poems because they don't really read a ton of poems. They're not super inclined to read poems. Although like one of them now is my brother Pedro. He'll text me and he'll be like, bro, I'm starting to think more poetically. Like instead of saying the sun is setting, he'll be like, you know, I try to see it as like, you know, uh, then the night rose from the ashes, or you know what I mean? Like he makes up images. Like he's starting to come up with images, not because he wants to write poems, but just because it's fun to him, you know. Um, but I try to write poems for them, right? In part because I knew one, a lot of poets, if they, you know, if they were interested, they were going to go get it. That was fine. But I didn't want to write my poems for other poets because they already have, you know, like especially like I know white people already have a million books written for them, right? And so if they, you know, if they don't like my book, then whatever, I don't care. They could go read Shakespeare or whatever else they want to read. But I wanted to make sure that I was writing a book that made, you know, my brothers feel like it was for them, right? And I think maybe that's why it's connected, because I think other people can feel the tenderness, and can feel the intimacy of like the way that I wrote it. But yeah, that's how I approached it. I had no idea it was going to do this well commercially. Um, and I'm almost like happy for that, because I think if I knew how many people were going to read it, maybe I would have been a little bit more shy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I would have been so forthcoming with some of the poems about family. Um, and so, yeah, so I think, yeah, I think it's complicated. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
No, you did. It was like, it was an awesome answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Lucia was asking, how long does it, so more about your writing process here, how long does it take you to write your poems?
It takes me usually a few hours. Um, Sometimes they come fast. The poem that I read yesterday, Ode to Tortillas, I wrote probably in like 45 minutes. Um, like once I had the structure, there are two ways to be Mexican. You know, I was like, all right, I can, basically the form of that poem is that refrain and then and answer, and the answer has to surprise in some way, right? So sometimes the poems are fast. A lot of times it takes me about a couple hours, and usually it's because I have a starting point, right? There's like a word, like one of the things that I love about the poem, the last poem that I read, that is the one that Mercedes sent me, is her, when she sent me that text message, I prefer the word discoteca to the word club. It was so random, but I also understood what she was saying, right? Like words have different textures, even when they're translations of one another, right? It's why I love the word ojalá, even though it just translates to the word hopefully, right? Or God willing. But ojalá, for me, that one word feels a lot more holy. There's like a little bit of God in that word, right? And so usually I have something like that, a thought, an image, something that I'm playing with. And then my job as a poet is to kind of figure out how do I get to that emotion? How do I show the emotion underneath that poem? And so that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Hmm. And Jose, a lot of students who were here, who were at the poetry contest yesterday, as I was saying at the beginning, read for the first time or made something public for the first time, right? And so I think you really inspired them. So we have David who's asking, kind of the more under the hood question, right? How do you connect with the right press, editors? And then kind of have you tried Chico's? So that's a famous, infamous Mexican restaurant here in El Paso. Well, Mexican, I might have thrown a grenade there because anyway, yeah.
I love controversial questions. I've never tried Chico's tacos, so I have no opinion. But I love most tacos. Even, I live here in the Northeast. They love to do like crazy fried fish tacos. And I used to be like very anti, because they usually do them on like flour tortillas, and they put other things on there other than like cilantro y cebolla. But I've just embraced it. I'm like, yes, the tacos are not authentic, but they are delicious. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I don't know Chicos, but if the food is delicious, then I'm with it. In terms of how do I connect with the right press editors for the work? So poetry is interesting because you don't get a ton of editorial oversight. Like I worked with a couple of editors on this book, but it was really on me to figure out what I wanted to do with the poems and how I wanted them to feel at the end of the day. I got a lot more copy editing than anything. And so copy editing is basically like, taking a look at the consistencies, like, oh, in this poem, everything is not capitalized except this word. Did you do that on purpose, or was it just autocorrect? Like someone just pointing out the inconsistencies, right? Or maybe one poem has no punctuation and then it ends with the period, right? And they're like, did you mean to throw in that period at the end? Or, should we add punctuation to the whole poem? And so the editorial question is, not one that I have a ton of experience with at this point. I think it helped that my editors kind of followed my vision for my work, right? So when I think they asked me if I wanted to translate the words in Spanish, and I was like, no, we're not translating. And they were like, cool, we're not translating. So that, that's an example of something that let me know I was in good hands. And then in terms of the press, Haymarket felt like a good fit for me. One, because it was local, right? It's a Chicago press. It's rooted in the same city that I'm from. And they had worked with a bunch of writers in Chicago. So I already knew that they were kind of dependable in that way. And then politically, we're aligned. So a lot of presses don't necessarily have a stated political vision, but for me, it was cool. Like I really love that I share a press with like Angela Davis, among other people, So for me, those were some of the things. But I think the most important thing, David, to answer your question is, you want to find people that really believe in your work and like share a vision for your work. Because some people will try to mold you into their vision of who you should be, right? They want you to write the, the deportation story, or what, you know what I mean? The most traumatic version of our story. And so you have to ask yourself, is that the vision that you want to put forward? Or do you have a different one? And then you got to figure out someone that's going to, back your vision for your work, is what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, Jose. So does anyone want to ask your question live? You can just unmute.
Real quick, I see Lucero asked the question, and then Cynthia, I see your hand, so we'll go to you next. Lucero says, can you tell us more about the regret poem? With that poem, Lucero, I was thinking about a particular night when we went back to Mexico and we were out, and my dad had been drinking, and I thought about like how I would feel in that situation. Like I've had the chance to go back home and, kind of flex and just like hang out with old friends, you know what I mean? And kind of get to celebrate with them. But my dad, because he had a family, when he went, you know what I mean? And so the poem Regret is about getting caught between, maybe the impulse that I guess I'm trying to relate to my dad now that I'm older. I was pretty mad at him in the moment that he would even think of like choosing anything else besides our family. But now that I'm older, like I can understand the appeal of like wanting to be out and kind of, get to flex a little bit and feel good, and how hard it must have been to come home, to like say no to that and have to continue to say no to that. You know what I'm saying? So that was kind of the thing that inspired that poem. I think in my poetry, I can be more tender towards the people in my life that sometimes, upset me or I don't understand them. It's a place where I can, consider them a little bit more clearly. And so that's where that poem comes from. And then Cynthia, I know you had your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question.
I think you're on mute.
Sorry. When you started writing, did you write when you were away from home, or did you start writing like being at home with your parents, or were you away?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cynthia. I started writing when I was in high school. So I was at home with my parents, but it took me a while to kind of figure out exactly my style, and then also how I was going to write. And so, when I was young, when I was a new poet, what I was trying to do is like, I would try to write one poem that answered all of the questions, right? Or one poem, I had like a feminist poem, right? And I had poems for issues, right? But the thing is that one, that issues are not neatly in boxes like that, right? They impact each other. And then the other thing is that there's always a bunch of like textures and nuances to consider. And so I had to figure out, and I think I had a homie in college who would make fun of me because he was like, I would perform with one of my friends like once a semester, and we would kind of do like Latinx pride poems where we would shout out all of, you know what I mean? Like it was just very feel good and upbeat. And he was like, like people love those poems, but it's also, it's when you write those poems in that way, they can be sugar, right? And so how do you write about the culture, not just as something that is consumable, but also as the people who make the culture, is one of the things that's important to me, right? Like, we live in this moment where people love Mexican food, but the Mexican and Central American staff that make not just their Mexican food, but their pizzas and all of their food, you know what I mean? Like they're invisible to them. They don't see them. And so how do you write poems that don't just shout out the cultural markers that everybody loves, but also the people that make them, the people that give them their joy and their power, you know? So that's one of the things that I try to figure out is like, for me, how am I going to make sure that the poem is doing the work that I want it to do?
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think we still have time for a couple more questions.
I have one, Jorge, if it's not
Go for it.
this room. So Jose, I want to give you props, you and Jorge, for staying in touch after we couldn't have you here last year, but it's just really cool on behalf of the college and the community for you to visit. And as everyone has said, you know, we can't wait to have you here in person. I was going to ask you a basketball question, but I don't think we have the same allegiances, so I think I'll pass on that one.
No, please ask me a basketball question.
No, you know, we do have a lot of students, and you know, as you know, we're right here on the frontera. So, like Chuco, you know, Chicago has a great literary history, and I'm just curious of maybe some of your OG poets that you like, specifically, you know, Chicanx, either from Chicago or from anywhere else, but you know, your work reminds me a lot of Juan Felipe and Brenda Cardenas, and there's just so many, you know, wonderful poets out there. But is there anyone you want to give props to that came before you?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Sandra Cisneros is another poet from Chicago, whose work means a lot to me. There is a short story writer whose name is slipping my mind from Texas, whose work I loved a lot. What is his name? I can't think of it right now.
Are you thinking of Gilb?
Yes, Dagoberto Gil.
Mm.
Yes, I love Dagoberto's stories a lot. So he's another person that inspired me. And I think my writing kind of moves more towards narrative, you know? So
Right.
I think you can see that in my work. And then in terms of other Chicanx writers that I really loved growing up, I feel like now that I'm being asked, all the names are slipping me. I mean, of course.
I should have asked you a Last Dance question, maybe. I don't know.
You know, I mean, I just feel like there's really so many poets. Juan Felipe Herrera, for sure. I've also gotten a chance to read with Brenda Cardenas before and really love her work. I think that, you know, she's probably, like, I try to play with music a lot in my writing, but I think her writing has even more of that than me. And then someone who's only a few years older than me, but whose work also means a lot to me is Lorianne Guerrero. So I think about her a lot. And then there's again, I don't know if this is really like an OG for me, but there's a poet out of Central California. What is his name? I always mix up the two. I think it's like Manuel Paul Lopez. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or it's Paul Manuel.
Yeah.
But his work is so funny to me, and it's so like the way it moves between the funny and then the tender is, you know, I don't even know. It feels like it was written specifically for me. You know what I mean? Like that's the writing that I love the most. So I love all his books. His first book, I think, is called Death of a Mexican and Other Poems.
Right.
Is beautiful. It's a beautiful book. And then I really enjoy a lot of Rigoberto Gonzalez's poems. So I feel like, you know, there's a ton of writing, and I just feel really lucky to be in the tradition.
Yeah, it was really not so much like a quiz, and I hope it didn't come off that way, but it was more giving you props, because I think the work is fresh. I mean, I think what you're doing with Cultura, you know, with hoop and music and spoken word, as well as the tradition, as you said. I mean, I just love and fell in love with it. And there's some of the Carlos Sanchez in there. There's some, you know, Carlos Cumpian in there. And I'm not name dropping for you and me or anybody else, but I think that when we think of the literature and the continuum that you're a part of, you know, it's just so great to know that you're walking the walk that that so many people have done. And I think that's something that needs to be put out there based on some of the other comments you've made about, you know, not writing for a particular audience or about a particular topic, but about, you know, claiming our space. And I just want to thank you for doing that so wonderfully. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. And I appreciate bringing you all those names into the conversation. I think I saw Reina, did you have a question too?
She did.
Hi, yes. So my connection's a little bad, so let me know if some of this gets lost, but you hinted a little bit right now in your response, and Rich did too, at playing with music, you know, in your poetry. And I know you have this love of hip hop, and a lot of your poetry has, you know, allusions to rappers or to specific lyrics. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about specifically the epigraph at the beginning of Citizen Illegal.
Mm-hmm. So I chose my epigraph, which, hold on, I'm flipping open to it right now. Not bad, huh? For some immigrants, which is a line from Jay-Z. For a couple of reasons, right? Like, one, I had noticed that in a lot of the books that I was reading, there was a tendency to choose like theorists, whether it was like bell hooks or Gloria Anzaldúa, or Simone de Beauvoir or whoever, right? To choose I mean, and the epigraphs were dope, but I wanted the first thing that the reader saw was not something academic, but something music. I wanted the reader to know right from the beginning that it wasn't going to be, I don't want my poems to live outside of, you know, outside of real people and their interactions, if that makes sense, right? Like I wasn't writing, I didn't want to write books that were just kind of, yeah, floating. You know, I'm not like, who's the dude, Emerson, who goes to Walden Pond and, you know, isolates and writes his books that way. Like, I write my poems not from isolation, but from community, right? And so I wanted the first thing that the reader saw to be a lyric from music to show the reader that, like, you know, maybe poetry is intimidating for you, but hopefully this shows you that it's not going, you know, that the book is welcoming you in, right? I wanted to write a book that was embracing people wherever they were coming from. And so I wanted to start with music. And then the reason why I chose that lyric is, I think, because one of my goals in writing the book was, I knew that no matter what book I wrote, there would be somebody that read it for its most saddest self, if that makes sense, right? There's somebody, like, I know from being in workshop that, you know, I could write a love poem and people are gonna be like, wow, that poem just, it treats migration so raw, you know what I mean? Like, they read what they wanna read, right? And I wanted my book to be a subversion of the expectation that, like, you know, I don't know how y'all feel out in El Paso, but growing up in my history books, Mexicans appeared 3 times, right? We appear during colonization, we appear during the Mexican-American War, and then we appear during immigration. And in all other times, Mexicans disappear from the conversation, right? And so, to me, I wanted to write my book, you know, to resist that easy kind of dismissal of us as, you know, having a very, as only being important when we're being colonized, killed at war, or otherwise assimilated, right? And so for me, that lyric felt powerful, to be like, you know, not bad, right? Like, we're doing all right for ourselves, all things considered. And I love that song. It's from the song Otis. which also has Kanye West. And, you know, I know Kanye is a controversial figure now, but his first album came out when I was 16. So there was like, Kanye was like the soundtrack to a lot of my big moments, you know? So I'm still trying to figure out what my relationship is to Kanye West now. Like, should I just not listen to his music anymore? I don't know. So yeah, that's a very long way of saying that. That's why I started with music and that lyric in particular.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you know, you got a shout out there, said also to Macklemore, and just talking about your hip hop influences. I know you have many, but you know what? Has been a great conversation. You know, unfortunately, we have to bring it to a close. But I want to give a shout out to all my colleagues who came here to support. You know, Rich is someone as well who has been a mentor to me and many people here, you know, as kind of an OG, you know, someone who taught me about the Puente teaching philosophy that, you know, someone like Lorena Germán trying to diversify the canon is what she's trying to do, you know, and that's what we're trying to do here at Paso Community College, you know, take advantage of the fact that we can teach your work. And I want to give a shout out to, she's not here, but, you know, radio waves go to space, so maybe it'll reach her. Natalia Sylvester, you know, she was the one who introduced us to you literally when we were at the Texas Book Festival. And ever since then, you've been so approachable, and I haven't met a more approachable writer and poet, you know, so I want to thank you for being so open and listening, you know. But, you know, I can't help but notice the rooster behind you. And the rooster is the mascot for Papagayo. So Papagayo, nice. You know, the name itself is kind of just like the band Korn. It's just kind of a name. But, you know, it's the certificate that we have here for you with the rooster emblazoned on it is what we want to leave you with. And so on behalf again of Paso Community College, you know, can't thank you enough for serving as judge yesterday, and thank you again for, you know, agreeing to sign those copies. You know, we definitely gotta find a way to bring you here maybe next year, you know, so we can show you the border. You know, I don't know if you've been to any of the borders in the U.S., but El Paso is really special, and of course, it's a place that means a lot to us. And you know, I want to thank you again. And you know, this will be posted online for those who weren't able to make it today. Definitely got to try the tap, and maybe some chicos, you know, that their tacos drenched in sauce. So you got some salsa on them, that tomato sauce, you know, so that's a whole other thing, you know. I don't want to open a can of worms there, but yes. But I'll drop it off to Richie, you know, since he's my co-host and he's hosting us today. But thank you again, Jose, on behalf of Paso Community College, El Paso, and Juarez.
Thank you, Jorge. I really, really, for real, thank all of you for having me. Thank you for giving me the space to read new poems. I'm sorry that I'm long-winded with my answers from time to time.
Not at all.
But yeah, I really love being here, and yeah, I would love to come down to El Chuco and hang out with you anytime. So you know, just say the word. I'm vaccinated now, so whenever it's safe, I'm more than happy.
And you know what, Jose, I think we're going to put together a podcast episode with student responses on your work. So keep an eye out for that, and you know, hopefully we'll get some good voicemail responses in that.
Cool. Absolutely. Yeah. Please let me know when that comes out.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Richie, did you have any last words?
No, just more gratitude. You know, I want to echo what you said right now about the fact that you're so open, you know, to hang out, talk your work, and share your stuff. So that's really important, you know, and you know, accessibility is so important. So I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm glad to see everyone here. I think we'll go ahead and just kind of hang out a little bit as people kind of leave the call. I think that's it for today. Anything else? If you want to check out some cool events. If you guys are writers yourselves, poets, I definitely invite you to check out a local event here in El Paso, a local project and organization, Barbed Wire Open Mic Series. We're part of Border Senses, and it's a place where you can sign up and share your work. So you have writing, if you have poems, come check it out. We're doing online shows. Soon enough, we're gonna do live in-person shows, and it's just a cool place to just interact and form community. One last thing I want to say, you can check us out on Mondays online, live online from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Mountain Time. We do have an archive though, so if you go on YouTube, you can actually look up Barbed Wire Open Mic Series, and check out some of those past shows. We're about to celebrate a whole year of doing it. So yeah, that's my word for you guys. Go check that out. Check out Papagayo as always. Jorge has just been doing amazing things at the lead, and it's been fun to be part of that, workshops every week and everything. So follow us online, Papagayo, Barbed Wire, Pasos, of course, lots of inspiring things going on. And if you haven't already, follow Jose online. He's joseolivarez.com. You can check out his website and all his links he's got there, and keep up to date with what he's got going on. But I'm gonna go ahead and
Yeah.
sign off on that.
Thank you again, Jose.
Thank you, everybody. Much love. Cuídense,
Right.
and hopefully we get to see each other soon.
Yes. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.